Hello, everybody. This is our podcast called The Art of Living Well. My name is Duffy Kessler,
And I'm Josh Monroe.
and we will be talking to you about our virtues. My virtue is humility.
And my virtue is prudence.
Yep. I'm going to state my claim why I think humility is the most important virtue and leads to the good life. In the book On Reading Well by Karen Swallow Pryor, she talks about how virtues are needed in order to attain the good life. Attaining all the virtues is the main goal of Christians, according to Karen Swallow Pryor. In my podcast, I'm going to talk about the virtue of humility. Pryor defines humility as an accurate assessment of oneself. I believe humility is the most important virtue. Having humility leads you to the other virtues and leads you to a humble and good life. Having humility is what Jesus commands from us. Without humility and understanding our proper place within creation, we cannot cultivate the other virtues. Mr. Monroe, would you like to share yours?
Yep. I'm going to respectfully disagree with you. I'm going to say, in the book On Reading Well by Karen Swallow Pryor, you can attain the good life and virtues by reading. One of the virtues that she mentions is prudence, and prudence is knowing what is right and wrong and still doing the right thing. And that is why I think prudence is the most important virtue.
I still think humility is. I have a quote from the book On Reading Well. It says, "Accordingly, moral philosophers have long considered the virtue that opposes pride, humility, to be the foundation of all other virtues." So how would you respond to that?
One question that brings up is just why? Why is it the foundation?
So to me, it's the foundation because humility pretty much is it's like the opposite of pride. So you need to be humble. That's what humility means to me. And being humble, you need to be humble to make everything else happen. You can't be prideful. If we're trying to follow Jesus and reach the good life, you can't have pride. You got to surrender yourself to Jesus. So I think that's the first step in taking to the good life, which eventually leads to all the other virtues.
Mm-hmm. Another question I have, because I feel like, in my own life with sports and just how I carry myself day to day, I get a little confused. What does it look like to have confidence in yourself but not be prideful?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think, me personally, this is kind of the reason I chose humility is I struggle with having humility a lot. When it comes to sports or just in class, it's just something that I struggle with. So I thought I would pick this one to be the most important and try to help myself reach this, talking about it with you, Mr. Monroe.
Okay. Well, I think now is a good time to bring up one of my quotes.
Yep.
On page 39 of On Reading Well. Prudence is wisdom at work on the ground, doing good and avoiding evil in real-life situations. I think this is just a good place to start with prudence. Wisdom is like knowing what is right and doing that. It's knowing what is right and practicing doing that. And I think that is why prudence is the most essential for attaining the good life, because if you can know what is right and do what is right, then you're pretty much set for all of the virtues, If you know what you do, if you know how to do it, and you do it, then, pretty self-explanatory,
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That sounds like a very good virtue that leads to the good life. But, by the way, I think all the virtues are very important. So I don't think, humility is way above the other ones. I think they're all kind of equal, but just me personally, I think humility for myself. But it could be totally different for you or for someone else. So, I totally see how you would pick that one. Makes a lot of sense. But I have some quotes from another article. The article is called Humility, a Biblical Definition. So in the article, Humility, a Biblical Definition by Hope Field, it talks about the ultimate example of humility. Jesus Christ is the ultimate example of humility according to the article. Following him and chasing the virtue of humility. Jesus' sacrifice on the cross is true humility. True humility seeks to bring glory and honor to God and looks out for the interests of others. This is the most important virtue for being a Christian, in my opinion. You need humility to live a fulfilled life dedicated in following Jesus Christ. So I think to become a Christian, you have to surrender yourself and kind of give yourself up. And I mean, even Jesus, like, who is the most powerful being that ever existed, like, washed his disciples' feet. And that takes a lot of humility. Like, you can't have any pride. You can't have any ego, like, when you do something like that. So I just think the first step, like, in giving yourself up is humility.
Mm-hmm. I think before we move forward any further, I think we should define what is the good life.
Yeah.
You know, I don't see a good life without Jesus. I think living the good life is following Jesus. I think that's it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's following Jesus no matter what the circumstance. Like, say, like, you're being persecuted for following Jesus. I think it's just, like, you got to keep following Jesus, and that will eventually lead you to the good life. It might not be the good life on earth, but I think the good life could, like, in my opinion, be, like, talking about heaven, too. Like, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I liked how you said, like, no matter the circumstances, you know?
Yeah.
Like, you could be broke, but if you have a beautiful relationship with Jesus Christ, I think your life is going to be more valuable than a rich atheist, you know? That's just a personal opinion of mine.
Yeah, like Mr. Montez was talking about in class, like those places in, like, the Middle East or in, like, China where the Christians are being persecuted and killed for their faith, like, that's not really, like, what most people consider a good life. Like, you're literally being killed for just practicing religious ideas and activities. But so that's why I would say the good life is, like, leading you to heaven. Like, the good life is waiting for you at heaven, not necessarily on earth, because God, like, makes our lives hard on purpose to kind of test us. So I don't really know if there's like a good life according to, like, other people for the Christians, if that makes sense. Like a rich, like, fun, necessarily good life.
Okay. I would like to bring up, kind of switch back to my virtue. Another quote I got from the book: when knowledge is used toward evil ends, it transforms from the virtue of prudence into the vice of cunning. So this quote kind of just explains, you know, what it would be like with the absence of prudence, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think obviously all the virtues are extremely important, but the reason why prudence stuck out to me was because if you don't have prudence, then you're not going to know what's right and wrong, and you're not going to know how and why you should have all the other virtues, you know?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So to go back to my virtue, humility, I want to bring up a little story that happened 2 weeks ago at a football game. So I was playing defensive end. This was, I think, the third quarter. We were down. Wasn't a great outlook, but, you know, I wanted to keep playing. I was super angry. I was super prideful, like, for myself, because, I mean, I had a pretty decent game, but the team didn't, so I was feeling kind of proud of myself, like, oh, like, I'm the best one on the team, like I'm the only one that can actually do anything. But then I kind of remembered, like, there's no need to have an ego. Like, if you're doing good, like, you should just appreciate, like, God's gifts for you instead of, like, trying to rub it in people's face or, like, hurt people on purpose. Like, I know it's football, how it's, like, supposed to be, like, kind of, like, relentless and, like, you're supposed to hit people, but you don't have to, like, hurt people. Like, you just got to play in the midst of the game, like, know after the play. So I kind of just realized that, like, just, like, literally on the fly during the game, that I don't need to be prideful or have an ego. Like, just appreciate my gifts. So, yeah.
It's a good story, Duff. You know, I actually have a story of humility, too. It was literally my class period right before this. You're in my Bible class, too. It's with Mr. Bond. There was a sub today, and he was about, what, like 70 years old, you think?
Yeah, he was a grandfather of two little kids.
Yeah, he was an interesting guy. He's got a military background, and I could just tell by the way he carried himself and the way he went about things that he was a very smart guy. And at the end of the class period, he was like, "All right, I will challenge any one of you to do a pull-up contest." And I was confused. I was like, "Wait, what? There's no way he would be able to beat me in a pull-up contest, right? Like, I'm 17 years old. I'm a starter on the varsity football team. Like, no way, right?" So, we walk outside, starting our break, and I ended up going first, and I had 20 pull-ups. And then he went second. And this guy, literally just effortlessly did 21 pull-ups. And he could have kept going, did more, but it was just insane to me how he could just be doing that at such an old age. And it just kind of reminded me of humility in a way, just there's always a bigger fish in the sea, and it's a good virtue to have,
Yeah, I'd like to say something about your virtue, prudence. I feel like as we get older, we develop prudence like more and more. Like especially me, like this became kind of like self-aware. Like just the older I got, like the smarter I got, the better decisions I made. The easier it was for me to decipher good and bad. Like I think prudence is like super important because like it leads you up. Like the older you get, the wiser you get. It just kind of comes with all that. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a very good virtue.
Yeah, I was actually doing some research, and the quote I pulled up was, "In practicing the virtue," which is prudence it's talking about, "we are better able to see the right thing. We are better able to see the right thing to do and to choose the right means for achieving it." I think that's pretty much just basically going off what you said about prudence. So, it's tough, to just choose one virtue.
Yeah.
That is the most essential. I think it's a really tough decision because they all kind of piggyback off of each other. Mm-hmm. But I think prudence, but humility is also important too.
Yeah, I have a question for you. Mm-hmm. Could you have prudence without humility? Just asking. You don't need to like. We can move on and talk about that later if you would like. Cause you could ask me the same question and say.
I think that's an important question that we should ask each other. I'll go first.
Okay. Yeah.
I think you're saying with the absence of humility, could you have prudence?
Yeah.
I don't think you'd be able to have prudence because if you don't know what humility is, then you don't have prudence. Yeah. So you don't know what's right and wrong.
I'd have to say the same. If it was like, could you have humility without prudence? Like, I don't think you could have any of the virtues if one of them was missing. I feel like you kind of need at least a little bit of all of them. So no, I don't think neither of us could have our virtue without the others. But that doesn't mean like that there's bad and better virtues. Like it kind of just depends on yourself and what you need in the time or whatever. Yep. So, although I do agree with you, Mr. Monroe, about prudence being a very, very, very useful virtue, I would still say that humility is the best virtue that leads to the good life. And I found that out through the book. I found that out through my articles. Like, it's just that's the one that's been calling to me. And so I would just like to hear another argument of yours about like prudence, because I can be persuaded. I just need to know. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Okay, Mr. Kessler. So I think the reason why humility stands out to you a lot is because of the personal effect it has had on you. Just throughout your football career and just throughout life. I think prudence is, I don't really have like a personal story. I just think that overall it's the most important virtue because, how are you supposed to, judge between virtuous and vicious acts, If you can't do that, then how could you live the good life? How could you be with Jesus if you can't judge between those two?
Yeah. So what would you say to someone, this isn't like a question from me personally, but say like an atheist asks you, they're like, well, why do you need to decipher what's good and bad in your decisions if God's just going to forgive you either way? So like, what would you say to that?
Well, what I said.
Why does it matter?
Yeah. Well, somebody, there's a difference between somebody who's just trying to be forgiven of their sins, just for the sake of it. I think that's pretty selfish. And then there's also a Christian standpoint, somebody who wants to be forgiven because they love God and they don't want to disappoint Him. So I think that's the difference between those two.
Yeah. So to go back to a quote in my book, page 226, it says, "True humility requires not only an understanding of oneself, but also an understanding of objective reality outside of oneself." So that's talking about like humility is not just about yourself. Like humility is everywhere around you. Like you kind of like it kind of reflects like the inside of you and then also the outside. So
could you explain further on that, Mr. Kessler?
Yeah, I got you. So to me, what I kind of got out of this quote was that like the ground of humility is like it's in yourself. It's of oneself. You have to be self-aware. You have to be willing to do the hard things. You have to be willing to drop the ego. And pride is always a way of not seeing oneself properly. So you just kind of got to be humble in everything you do, humble in everything around you, and be able to tell like who's humble, who's not, and like just help other people out as well. So yeah.
Why?
Why what?
Why is it important to be humble?
Oh, it's important to be humble because we're supposed to follow in Jesus' footsteps, and He was the most humble man to ever come on this planet. And so I think that's like the main reason that I picked humility, because we're told to act like Jesus and follow His word, follow His actions, and He was the perfect example of humility. Just like I read in the beginning. I can read it again if you want.
Oh yeah, please remind me of that.
Yeah, Jesus Christ is the ultimate example of humility. According to the article, following Him and following and chasing Him is the virtue of humility. So following Him is literally the virtue of humility. Jesus' sacrifice on the cross is true humility. True humility seeks to bring glory and honor to God and looks out for the interest of others. So yeah, that's why I kind of think that humility is like, honestly, like the bottom step. The bottom step meaning that it's like the way up, the first step up to follow God. So, and also the book defines humility as, most simply defined as an accurate assessment of oneself. In case that helps.
Mm-hmm. So we're kind of coming to an end of this podcast, and we've kind of gotten all of our points out and debated quite a bit back and forth. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts? Do you think humility or prudence is the most important virtue?
I think I'm going to stick with humility just because it just resonates with me so well, and like I think you did a great job trying to persuade me, and I do agree that that's super important, but just to me personally, I'm going to have to stick with humility for tons of different reasons. Like the main reason being that I think it's the first step into the good life, meaning like following God. So yeah, what about you?
It's always hard to choose one virtue. I think I'm gonna stick with prudence, though.
Okay. Respectfully.
Respectfully, of course. No disrespect, But yeah, I think that wraps it up. So,
But
sorry.
I think I'm speaking for both of us here. Like, all the virtues are like some of the most important things that we'll ever learn in our whole lives. So, I think humility is most important, but not by far. Like they're all up there. You need all of them to reach the good life. You need all of them to follow Jesus Christ. So, Yeah, I think that's all we got to say. You got anything else, Mr. Monroe?
I think that's all. I just want to thank Mr. Montez for doing this. Me and Duffy come from a public school, and this type of education is different.
Yeah.
This podcast, this learning about virtue. This would have never happened at San Clemente High School. So I just want to thank you, Mr. Montez, for giving me and Duffy this opportunity.
Yeah, and I may not like some of the homework we get in class, may not enjoy class all the time, but I'd say I truly learn stuff that I'll use for the rest of my life. So,
and we'll definitely,
you, Mr. Montez.
Yes, sir, and we'll definitely be better people after it. So, this is Josh Monroe.
This is Duffy Kessler. This is a very fun podcast. So, thank you for listening.
This episode has been a production of the Capistrano Valley Christian Schools Podcast Network. Capistrano Valley Christian Schools is a Christian JK-12 school in San Juan Capistrano, California. Be sure to check out, subscribe to, and leave a review of this show and the other shows on our network on your podcast player of choice. Doing so supports the school community in a multitude of ways. For more information about the CVCS Podcast Network or any of our other shows, check out cvcs.org or email podcasts@cvcs.org. On behalf of the whole network, this is Mr. Jasper saying thank you again for listening and stay tuned for more.